All right, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Black Lives Matter and what we can do, and racism and how we can combat it. So, a lot of topics lately have been bringing attention to this and trying to, or say, demanding change, rightfully so. But a big part is, what can we do realistically? And so one of the things I thought about was, as much as I think in many ways it'll be difficult, I do think it is important for everyone to be able to speak. And by that I mean everyone on all sides of the conversation. And while a lot of people might think that that's endorsing or tolerating intolerance, really I think the importance of allowing people to speak is that then we know who we need to talk to. Then we know who, I say, needs to be educated, needs to be informed on real life situations. Because, if people are fearing speaking their piece, and it's, I want to say necessarily in opposition of Black Lives Matter, but simply not necessarily in 100% support. For example, like with Drew Brees and such, if he can't speak what's true to him, then we don't know he needs to be reached. A lot of people have referred to him as being the problem. And as I would describe it, I think he's maybe a product of the problem, but not the source of the problem. The source of the problem is the people who are actively engaging in racism, and again too, using that racism in authoritarian positions to hurt Black communities. And so again, I think it's important to make that distinction and not conflate people who are maybe apathetic or are not fully supporting Black Lives Matter as somebody we can reach and somebody we can educate. Because I think that while it's justifiable and understandable to feel angry and lash out at people who are maybe in the middle, I don't think it's going to sway their minds. And so again, I think that's the biggest importance too, is even for the truly bigots, for the people who are racist to the core, I think it's important for them to be able to speak, because then we know who the bigots are. Then we know who the hateful people are, who we're fighting against. I think that if we silence them, it can do two things. One, it's going to give them anonymity. We're not going to know who they are. And two, it may make us believe that the problem's solved because we don't hear their voices. And so again, it's much, I really believe in results. And I know that, the idea of trying to silence those hateful voices, I understand that there's a lot of people out there, I'm sure, that would be torment mentally for them to hear these things. And again, too, there's certainly certain platforms on social media and such that I think we should, censor that level of hate and so forth, and no problem. But I think completely trying to silence them, again, is just going to give us the illusion that they're gone. And then two, it's also going to give them this shroud of hidden secrecy, where they're still going to have that mindset, but we're just not going to know who they are. And so as much as it sucks, I appreciate when people point out that they're the jerk in the room, that they're the people that we're against. Like I said, is that they're actually pointing a target on themselves, as far as these are the people that we need to fight back against, these are the people that we need to, I'm going to say, verbally denounce. But like I said, is I think a huge part of it, and again, you just kind of come back to that. I think that kind of silencing opposition, silencing the other side, to me is actually one of the things that actually inadvertently helps this to continue and for change not to happen. Because without dialogue, again, we can't educate, we can't inform, because we don't know who they are. And again, too, if we immediately shun people who are in the middle or even someone on the opposition, again, their hearts are going to get hardened, and they're not going to be willing to listen to reason. They're not going to be willing to listen to testimonies, which is the second part I think would be amazingly helpful, is if we had, say, people in the Black community talking about their personal painful experiences with racism, and just giving a personal firsthand experience of what they've been through and how they've been treated, so that people who don't think that exists, again, I say I grew up in Seattle, back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and from where I lived, I didn't see any racism. Not to say that I didn't think it was out there. I knew that there were certain parts in the country that were, but I certainly didn't think that it was as prolific as it is. And again, too, it was just because of the environment I was raised in, the people that I came across. I never once thought of ever judging anybody on the color of their skin. And again, too, nobody around me ever projected that. But that's the thing, is that by giving testimonies, as I got older, I had family members give me testimonies of their experiences, and it really opened my eyes to the truth. And so again, I think it's really important for people to speak their ignorance so that we know who we need to talk to, that we know who will benefit from firsthand experiences. And again, too, I also think that once we have some testimonies out there, and again, too, I would just encourage as many people that have the strength to give testimonies to their own pain with racial hate, so that again, people can see the scale of it. You know, it's one thing I realized with my own pain as I hid it from everyone around me, was I realized after so many years that I couldn't expect them to help me and be compassionate to me and understand me if they didn't know I was hurting, because I hid it very well. And again, too, I'm not saying that that's the agenda, but I think that a lot of times that's kind of how we approach our pain, is that we hide it from the world. And again, it's a very sore personal subject, and we don't want to be vulnerable in that manner. But again, I think it'd be so beneficial for people to just see the true pain that is out there. Because again, too, I've been living in Montana for almost 18 years, and that was actually my first experiences with racism was out here in Montana. And again, I would say that 95% of the people out here are great, salty earth people, the people that have no prejudice. But that was one thing that I experienced firsthand, was there were some people out here where I wasn't white enough. My mother's white, my father's not white. And so again, to my upbringing, I was more referred to as, at best, or racially blended or something, or a lot of people just think I'm a tan white guy. But when I lived out here, there was a handful of situations where I was really taken back, and I saw a lot of just blind hate because I wasn't white enough. And so again, that's really what opened my eyes to, if this is how you look at me, how would you treat my father? How would you treat my cousins and my uncles and aunts, who are far more, far more, racially or obviously not as white as me. And so again, it's just one of those things where I think that if people can use their own testimonies about their pain, that it would just it would be an eye-opening situation for so many people in this country. Because again, I grew up in a very racially diverse family, but I had never witnessed these types of things. So again, it just comes back to people's own personal experiences, and we don't all see the same truth at the same time. And I think that's really what we're called to do, is just use our own testimonies to shine light on pain so that it can be healed. And that's the nature of these testimonies. I think it wouldn't be a matter of trying to bring attention to individuals rather than bring attention to a problem that would benefit a community. So again, I think it's just about really looking at the problems and what we can do to change it. And like I said, I think a big part of it is trying to be compassionate. I know that, at least for myself, there have definitely been times where I've heard people saying prejudiced things, and I wouldn't necessarily distinguish them as straight up racist, but there were certainly where they had experienced a very minimal amount of diversity at all, and they would say these just super prejudiced remarks about they can't help themselves. And I'm just thinking, like, I have family members who are black. I don't remember them ever compulsively doing anything, and yet I just realized it was from their ignorance. It was the fact that they had like maybe one experience, and they labeled the entire demographic as this is how they behave. And again, I'm like, as much as that's infuriating, at the same hand, I think that those people can be swayed. I think that if they're dealt with compassionately, almost, I don't want to be a condescending, but almost like a child, where you just need to educate them of their ways, how they did it wrong. And again, I think that's really one of the things that encouraged me with this theory on what could help, was that I have 4 children, and one thing I've learned is what worked yesterday isn't necessarily going to work today, and what worked for one child isn't necessarily going to work for another. So I don't think that there's one way to solve this. I think it's a matter, like I said, of just thinking of multiple ways, and again, too, trying to be as compassionate as we can be when we're trying to educate, so that we have willing ears. I think if we harden people's heart and try to force them and say that if they don't act, if they don't sign petitions, if they don't protest, if they aren't actively fighting this, and that they're the problem, I think that's just going to make them sit there in silence and continue not finding a voice. And again, it's just a matter of doing what we can. And that's one of the things that, again, too, for myself, I don't want to say I've been on the fence, with the national anthem thing. But as I discussed in one of my earlier videos, my twin brother was killed in war. And so, the national anthem and any type of recognition at all towards the military, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, every day is Memorial Day for me and my family. And so it's a very raw pain. That being said, that was one of the things that I've thought about recently, was that with my own experience, back in November for Veterans Day, I spoke at the local high school. And what I thought about doing was I really just wanted to, from a firsthand experience, talk about our pain and do it in a way that was educating rather than simply just declaring my pain and declaring the sacrifice my brother gave. And I explained that, for those of us who have lost loved ones and those of us who have fought in the war and lost friends and family in the war's not over. Just because we're not actively going on missions, just because bombs aren't dropping actively because there aren't boots on the ground as they were in the past, doesn't mean the war's over. It's continuing through all of us who have lived through it, and it will continue until we're laid to rest. And that's one thing that, after thinking that reality and coming and bringing it into words, that I realized for those who lived through segregation, is it's not over. Just because the law passed so many years ago, and just because it's illegal to discriminate, doesn't mean that pain that was there for years and years and decades isn't cemented into their minds of how they were treated and how society treated them and how it's publicly acceptable to treat them that way. And so again, I think that's something important to realize, is that just because we've changed the law, just because so many years have passed, doesn't mean that pain isn't just as fresh as the day it was implemented, and the days and days and days that it was implemented, to where people were arrested if they tried to go into certain restaurants. And, Rosa Parks being arrested because she wouldn't give up her seat for a white man. Those types of things don't go away from a person's mind. The minimalistic handful of experiences I've dealt with racial hate hasn't gone away. Fortunately enough, it wasn't, like I said, the vast majority of people I've befriended out here are very nice, wholesome people. And so fortunately, it's not something that I fear, but every now and then I will have somebody that will want to go to park where I'm standing and then stop, and I always wonder, is it because I'm just not white enough? And so again, it's just something that when you have trauma, when you have traumatic pain, it's something that will always be with you. It's just a matter of becoming stronger and learning to live with it. But that's why it's so important not to act like this is a thing of the past, that segregation is a thing of the past, is because, especially too when you see these things happening with George Floyd and others, where they're being innocently killed, I'm sure that triggers a lot of past pain, because it brings back those moments when everyone who was black had a target on their back. And so again, it doesn't have to happen all the time or any great percentage for it to be a real, genuine fear. So again, these are just some things I think that we need to look at. And again, too, that was one of the things that I thought about, was just, again, having people in the black community talk about what would help, just advising, what they think as far as, how people of other races can support them, how white people can support them, and so forth. Just because, I think that there are people, like I said, out there that really want to help, but they might be hesitant to talk about it because they're not quite sure how to properly do that without being insensitive or too demanding and trying to take charge. Is one of those things where, I'd really love to see a lot of messages going out there of what communities and what individuals can do to really invoke change locally and then on a grander scale for the country. But yes, I believe that we will get there. But yes, we do need to be constant. We do need to be vigilant. We can't just deal at the moment. We can't just run on this high for a while and talk about it and then let it dissipate. Become, just a thing where we don't talk about it as much. It kind of dies down until something other traumatic happens. Again, it's just a matter of that we really need to be active and do what we can to invoke change. Because I think individually we can't accomplish a lot, but as a collective whole, as a nation, we can accomplish so many things. And as always, good luck and good night.